Everyone gave up on him until she changed his life forever. It was late afternoon when Anna first saw Caleb Turner. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the town of Willow Creek. The sky was that soft, bruised color that promised the chill of evening, and everything around her felt still, like the world was holding its breath. She had been walking home from the market when she spotted him. He was standing on the front porch of his farmhouse, or what remained of it. The paint was peeling off in wide, dry strips. The wooden boards creaked with the weight of age, and the garden was overgrown with weeds that tangled around the broken fence like hands reaching for something that had long been forgotten. But it was Caleb himself who stopped her in her tracks. She had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in town had heard them. The whispers at the cafe, the hushed voices at the diner, the half-sympathetic glances from people who didn't know what to say, except that they had heard about the crash, about how Caleb had ruined everything, about how he'd been the golden boy, the local hero, until that one night, the one that had taken away his best friend. And with it, everything else. People warned Anna to stay away from him. He's dangerous, they said. He's broken. A lost cause. Some things can't be fixed. But Anna didn't hear any of it. Not the whispers, not the warnings. She had learned something the hard way in her own life, something most people would never understand. The most broken people often have the most beautiful souls. The ones who have been shattered, the ones who carry the heaviest burdens, are sometimes the ones who can love the most, if only someone has the courage to see beyond the pain. If you're brave enough to look. And as she stood there, watching him from the street, she felt that tug in her chest. The kind that called her to do something, to move beyond the judgment the town had so quickly placed on him. She had to look. She had to know him. There was something about the way he stood there, his body bent under an invisible weight, that made her want to step forward and share the burden. His head was slightly tilted downward, as if the world had beaten him into a submission that he couldn't shake, even when he tried. He looked so small, so tired, as though his body was a prison he couldn't escape. His eyes were hollow, sunken, dark, like they had once held something vibrant, something full of life, but it had been extinguished in the crash that stole his best friend away. She could almost see the shadows of the past in those eyes, the grief, the guilt, the pain. And yet, behind it all, there was something flickering, something soft, a small, distant spark of something that was still alive inside of him. His shoulders were hunched, like he was carrying a burden no one else could see. The kind of weight that could break a man. The kind of weight that could make you forget how to breathe, how to live. The wind stirred the leaves around him, but Caleb didn't move. He just stood there, alone, like a man caught in time, trapped in the memory of who he had once been and the tragedy that had reduced him to this. Anna's heart twisted at the sight. She wanted to approach him. She wanted to say something, anything, that might break the silence between them. But she knew the town's judgment would hang heavy over her actions, like a shadow, and she'd have to live with it. They would say she was naive, too kind for her own good. But the thing was, Anna didn't care. Not about what the town thought. Not about the whispers. She wasn't going to let the world decide for her who Caleb Turner was. She took a deep breath, and then, without a second thought, she stepped off the sidewalk. One foot in front of the other, slow but determined. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if he would push her away. She didn't know if the town would condemn her for even trying. But she was going to look, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. He had it all. The world at his feet, or so it seemed. Caleb Turner was the golden boy of Hawthorne, the pride of the high school football team, with a smile that could charm any crowd. Quarterback, scholar, the athlete who could do it all. The boy every father wanted their daughter to marry, and every mother hoped would befriend their son. The whole town cheered for him. They wore his jersey with pride. They painted his name on banners that hung across Main Street, celebrating his victories and the promises they thought he'd fulfill. When he walked through the halls, people parted for him. When he spoke, they listened. When he smiled, the town smiled with him. His future stretched out ahead of him, bright and shining. He was going places, everyone said. He was bound for greatness, for a life of success and admiration. And then came the crash. It was a late night in early winter. The roads were slick with ice, the kind of night where the world seems to hold its breath, quiet and still, waiting for something to break the silence. Caleb and his best friend, Adam, had just finished a late practice. They were speeding down the empty country road, talking about their plans for the future, big dreams of football scholarships, college life, maybe even the pros. They joked about life after high school, about girls and freedom and the places they would go. And then, in an instant, everything changed. A sharp turn, too fast, too careless. The tires slid, the car fishtailed, and Caleb couldn't correct it in time. Adam's laughter stopped just as quickly as the engine's roar. The crash was deafening. The world turned upside down. And in the space of a heartbeat, Caleb's life was shattered. When the dust settled, Caleb was alive, but barely. He had the scars to prove it. The broken ribs, the fractured arm, the bruises, the stitches, the shattered glass that had cut deep into his skin. But it was the emotional scars that would never heal. Adam, his best friend, was gone. His life had ended in that car, and Caleb's future had ended with it. The town, which had once adored him, turned its back on him. People didn't know how to react. They couldn't look at him without seeing the boy who had killed his best friend. The same boy who had been the promise of their town, now reduced to nothing more than a broken, limping shell of his former self. Neighbors crossed the street when they saw him coming. Old friends, the ones who used to share their dreams with him, disappeared as quickly as smoke curling into the night. No one knew how to talk to the boy who had ruined everything. The hero who had been the town's shining star was now the reason for their whispered judgments, their cold glances. They said it was his fault. They said if only he had been more careful. If only he had known better. But Caleb didn't know how to explain. He didn't know how to say that it wasn't just a mistake. It was a tragedy, something he couldn't change. He couldn't bring Adam back. He couldn't fix what was broken in him, what was broken in everything. So he withdrew. He became a ghost, a shadow, a bitter, limping figure that no one really saw anymore. He avoided the town. He avoided the people who once cheered for him. It was easier to slip into the background, to let them forget him, because forgetting was better than facing their judgment. Every now and then, someone would mention Caleb's name, but the words felt hollow. A local legend, a tragedy, a story everyone pretended to forget. But Anna wouldn't forget. She hadn't known Caleb before the crash. She had only moved to Hawthorne a year after it happened, when the town had already branded him a lost cause. At first, she heard the whispers too. She heard the stories about the boy who had ruined everything. She heard the way people spoke of him like he was a shadow of someone they used to know. But something about Caleb's presence haunted her, even from a distance. She saw the way he walked through town with his head down, the way he avoided eye contact, as if expecting the world to judge him with every step. He wore his isolation like a second skin, the deep, invisible scars that ran deeper than any cut. She wasn't like the others. She didn't believe in the town's judgment. And when she saw him, standing alone in the corner of the diner or sitting on his porch, staring at the horizon as if trying to find a way back to a life he'd lost, something in her heart reached out. Caleb Turner was more than his past, she thought. He was more than the mistakes he had made. Maybe the town had written him off, but she wasn't ready to give up on him. And so, Anna took a step that no one else had dared to take. She walked toward him, not as a savior, not as someone trying to fix him, but as someone who saw the boy behind the ghost, the one who still had something worth offering. And that was the moment everything began to change. For Caleb, for Anna, for the town that had forgotten how to hope. The rain came in waves, thick, unrelenting. It hammered down on Hawthorne Lane like the sky itself was broken. The wind whipped the trees, bending them sideways, and the road was turning into a thin, muddy river. Anna stood on the porch of Caleb's farmhouse, the hem of her coat soaked through, her boots sinking into the wet earth beneath her. She hadn't meant to stay out here this long. She hadn't meant to get this nervous. But somehow, the world had turned into a vast ocean of silence, and here she was, standing in the heart of it, holding a pie she had baked herself. Clumsily, awkwardly, the edges uneven. The crust had browned too much in some places, and the filling was a bit too runny. She had wanted it to be perfect, wanted it to mean something, but she knew the reality of it. She was just a woman on a rainy day with a warm pie and a heart full of hope. What if he didn't want it? What if he slammed the door in her face? What if this vulnerable attempt to connect turned out to be just another failed idea, just another lost effort? Maybe he'll hate me, she thought, biting her lip, taking a long breath. Maybe he'll never open the door at all. She lifted her hand to knock. Her fingers trembled, and for a moment, she almost turned away. But then she thought about what had brought her here. The way he had carried through a storm, his eyes softer than she ever imagined someone like him could have been. The way he'd held on to life, desperate and fierce, as though life was worth saving. No, she couldn't just walk away. Her knuckles tapped the door, 3 quick raps, followed by the softest of pauses. Her heart drummed wildly in her chest, the silence between them stretching like an endless chasm. The door creaked open. The man standing there was nothing like she expected. His broad shoulders hunched, and his face was shadowed, like he'd been worn down by too many storms of his own. His eyes, those stormy blue eyes, pierced through the crack in the door. They were cautious, guarded, as though he was waiting for her to speak, but also expecting her to turn away. Anna's mouth went dry. She tried to steady her shaking hands, clutching the pie tightly against her chest like a shield. She said, her voice trembling but steady, forcing the words out. I'm Anna. I live next door. Her words hovered in the thick, damp air. She felt every second of his silence weigh on her, like an anchor sinking deeper into the ground. The tension between them was palpable. Her heart pounded in her ears, drowning out everything but the faint sound of raindrops hitting the roof and the soft creak of the door. And then, slam! The door shut so abruptly that it rattled the walls. Anna flinched, the sound ringing in her ears like the worst kind of rejection. Her chest tightened, a bitter lump settling in her throat. And in the distance, she heard the echo of laughter, a cruel, biting sound that cut through the quiet night like a razor. Told you he'd never change. He's a lost cause. The words were meant for him, meant to drag him down. But they were aimed at her. At her courage, her belief that maybe, just maybe, he could be reached. The whole town had written him off long ago, and they'd written her off too, without even knowing her. But Anna didn't flinch. She didn't crumble. She didn't let their voices drown her out. Her hand tightened around the pie, the warmth of it somehow steadying her. She had known this wouldn't be easy. She had known it would be hard, would be messy. But the thing about real change, it wasn't neat. It wasn't clean. It wasn't a simple, easy path to follow. Real things? Real things took time. She turned and walked away from the door. Her boots splashed through the growing puddles, but her head was held high. Her shoulders were square, her resolve as strong as the wall she had just faced. She wasn't looking for easy victories. She wasn't looking for quick fixes or instant miracles. She was looking for something deeper, something real. The pie wasn't perfect, but it was offered, and that, for her, was all she had. And it was enough, folded neatly, placed carefully at his door. Small, almost shy, but impossible to ignore. Caleb stared at it for a long time before he picked it up, as if it might vanish if he moved too fast. The paper was plain, torn from some old notebook, but her handwriting danced across it, steady in places, shaky in others. It said only, "Everyone deserves a second chance. Even you. Everyone deserves a second chance. Even you." There was no signature, no expectation, no apology, just an offering, gentle, trembling, real. She didn't knock again. She didn't call out his name. She didn't force her way into the broken fortress he had spent years building around himself. She simply waited. Every morning after that, there was something new left on his porch. Small, quiet gifts that spoke louder than any shouted declaration. The first came on a bone-bitingly cold morning. A battered thermos, dented and scuffed, sitting on the top step. Steam still curled from its lid, rising into the frozen air like a whispered promise. Caleb kicked it half-heartedly at first, grumbling under his breath. But when the wind cut sharper and his bones ached like old regrets, he found himself kneeling in the doorway, unscrewing the lid with numb fingers. The coffee inside was strong, bitter, black as midnight. exactly the way he liked it, though he had never told her. He drank it down in 3 long swallows, the heat burning his throat, warming something even deeper than his blood. The second gift came 3 days later, a dog-eared novel wrapped loosely in butcher paper. When Caleb peeled it open, a sticky note fluttered free. Scrawled across it in familiar messy ink were 6 words. "I thought you might like this." It was an old adventure story, one he had loved as a boy, but had forgotten somewhere along the road to losing himself. The pages smelled faintly of dust and lavender soap. At night, when sleep refused to come, he found himself thumbing through it, letting the words anchor him to something steadier than the restless ache inside. The third gift appeared just before Christmas. A scarf, hand-knitted, if you could call it that. The stitches were uneven, too loose in some places, too tight in others. The color was a wild, ridiculous green that made him scowl and then, stupidly, made him laugh for the first time in months. It smelled like wood smoke and something sweeter underneath. Like maybe, despite all the mistakes stitched into it, someone had poured every ounce of trembling care they had into every loop and knot. Caleb tried to resist, tried to pretend he didn't notice, tried to harden himself against the slow, persistent siege happening on his front porch. But late at night, when the house creaked under the weight of old ghosts, when the cold and the memories gnawed at his bones, he found himself reaching, again and again, for the scarf, scratchy but warm, draped around his neck like a lifeline, for the book, resting easy in his hands, grounding him when the past tried to pull him under, for the scent of coffee, lingering like the memory of laughter he hadn't heard yet, but knew would come. And maybe he didn't answer the door. Maybe he didn't say thank you, or come in, or stay. But every morning, without fail, he opened the door. And every morning, something small, something stubborn, healed a little more inside him. Not in grand, sweeping gestures, not in dramatic declarations, but in the quiet way sunlight melts ice, in the patient way roots push through stone, in a way a second chance feels when you finally start believing you deserve it. The first raindrop fell at dusk, a single dark kiss on Caleb's cracked windowsill. By nightfall, the sky over Willow Creek was blacker than pitch. Heavy clouds churned and rolled like angry beasts, swallowing the moonhole. The air grew thick and electric, buzzing against the skin like a warning. Caleb sat in his creaking armchair, a tattered book open on his lap, though he hadn't turned a page in an hour. Milo the cat had long since disappeared under the couch, ears flat, tail twitching anxiously. Outside, the wind howled, not the playful kind, but a deep, guttural roar that rattled loose shutters and clawed at the siding like invisible hands. Thunder cracked, so close it shook the floorboards, sending shivers up Caleb's spine. He closed the book and glanced toward the window. Across the field, Anna's cottage was a tiny, flickering light against the darkness. Warm, fragile, a stubborn candle trying to hold back the storm. A bolt of lightning slashed the sky, illuminating the ancient oak that towered above her house. Its heavy branches swayed violently, groaning under the assault. Caleb's gut twisted. That tree had stood for 100 years, but tonight it didn't look invincible. Another rumble shook the valley. Rain poured in thick, punishing sheets, blurring the world into a gray smear. The power blinked once, twice, and then surrendered, plunging the farmhouse into cold, suffocating darkness. Caleb sat still, listening, counting. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Crack. The sound was monstrous, like the earth itself splitting apart. The ground shuddered beneath him. A shockwave rolled through the night, followed by a terrible, heavy silence. Caleb's heart lurched. His breath caught in his throat. He scrambled to the window, wiping at the condensation with his sleeve. Through the rain, he saw it. The old oak, split down the middle, one half crashed clean through Anna's roof. Smoke like dust and debris billowed up into the stormy air. He didn't think, didn't weigh his bad leg, his broken past, the pain he knew would come. He simply moved, grabbing the heavy flashlight from the table, He shoved his boots on bare feet and flung open the door. The wind hit him like a freight train, ripping the breath from his lungs. Staggering forward, he pushed into the storm, his coat flapping wildly behind him. Each step was a battle. Mud sucked greedily at his boots, and jagged debris tore at his legs. The rain was blinding, a relentless curtain that turned the world into a roaring, colorless void. His bad knee screamed with every stride, but he gritted his teeth and pressed on. Anna needed him. That was all that mattered. Reaching the shattered remains of her porch, Caleb shouted into the howling wind. Anna, where are you?" A faint sound answered, a weak, desperate cry, somewhere inside the broken house. Panic clawed at his chest. He kicked open the battered door and stumbled inside. The scene was chaos. The ceiling sagged dangerously, water poured in through gaping holes, furniture was smashed and strewn everywhere. And there, trying to haul a box of belongings to safety, was Anna, her face pale, her hair plastered to her forehead, her hands bleeding from splinters. "Leave it," Caleb barked. He reached her in 2 staggering steps and yanked the box from her arms, tossing it aside. She tried to argue, her voice lost in the gale, but he shook his head fiercely. "No more saving things," he said, voice hoarse. "I'm saving you." She hesitated, and then finally let go. He swept her up in his arms, the weight unfamiliar but welcome. Milo yowled pitifully from somewhere near the fireplace. Caleb stooped, scooped the terrified cat into his coat without breaking stride, and barreled back into the maelstrom. The journey back was agony. Twice he nearly fell, his bad leg buckling under the strain. Once a branch whipped across his face, leaving a stinging gash. But he never loosened his grip on Anna, never slowed down. Inside the safety of his farmhouse, he slammed the door shut against the shrieking wind, collapsed onto the floor, cradling Anna against his chest. For a long moment, neither moved, just breathing, just existing, alive. Anna's small hand clutched the front of his soaked shirt. Her body shook, not just from cold, but from the terror she had hidden so well for so long. Caleb wrapped the old quilt around her shoulders and stoked the fire back to life. The flickering light danced across the room, casting long shadows. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, in that battered, broken farmhouse, something new was born, the beginning of trust. Caleb sank into the armchair beside her, aching and exhausted. Anna's head eventually drooped onto his shoulder, and Milo curled up at their feet, purring softly. And for the first time in years, Caleb Turner realized he wasn't the only one who needed saving, and he wasn't alone anymore. Not ever again. The world outside Caleb's window was unrecognizable. The storm had torn Willow Creek apart. Roofs were peeled back like tin cans, trees uprooted like weeds. But the sky was breathtaking now, a washed-out blue streaked with gold, like a battle-scarred warrior painted in light. Inside the farmhouse, silence settled, heavy, profound. The only sounds were the low crackle of a dying fire, the ticking of an old clock, and the soft, steady breathing of Anna asleep on the worn-out couch. Caleb sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped tightly around a mug of cold coffee he hadn't touched. His knuckles were raw. His knee throbbed with every heartbeat. His whole body ached, not just from the storm, but from the weight of 1,000 memories he couldn't push away anymore. Last night had cracked him wide open, exposed every wound he thought he'd buried. When he carried Anna through the storm, he wasn't just carrying her. He was carrying the boy he used to be. The boy who hadn't been fast enough, strong enough, good enough to stop the crash 3 years ago. He had failed once, and for years, the guilt had told him he would always fail, always lose, always destroy the people he loved. But last night, in the worst night, he hadn't failed. He saved her. Caleb blinked hard, trying to push back the sting in his eyes. The relief was almost unbearable, like a dam breaking after years of drought, like finally breathing after drowning for too long. Across the room, Anna stirred under the quilt. Her face was peaceful now, framed by tangled curls and faint bruises. She clutched Milo close to her chest, even in sleep. The stubborn little cat hadn't left her side all night. Caleb watched them, heart thudding unevenly. A part of him wanted to retreat, to rebuild the walls he had so carefully crafted around himself, to shove her away before she realized how broken he really was underneath all the stubbornness and anger. But another part, the part he hadn't listened to in years, whispered, "Maybe you're not too broken after all. Maybe you're exactly what someone needs." The thought terrified him. It thrilled him. He set the coffee down and leaned back in the chair, staring at the patchy ceiling. The storm had ripped away so many things, but it had given him something too. A beginning. Not perfect, not clean, but real. He didn't know what would come next. Didn't know if he could ever fully outrun the darkness that lived in his chest. But for the first time, he wasn't running alone. Across the room, Anna's eyes fluttered open. Sleepy, vulnerable, full of quiet trust. Caleb smiled, a real, aching, heart-wide-open smile, and whispered into the soft, golden morning, "Good morning, Anna." She smiled back, and just like that, in a house still scarred by the storm, something new and stubborn and beautiful bloomed between them. Hope. The storm had passed, leaving Willow Creek cloaked in eerie silence. The streets were littered with fallen branches and bits of torn shingles. Mud caked the sidewalks. The air smelled of wet earth and something older, like the town itself had been cracked open, exposing forgotten wounds. Caleb stood at the threshold of his farmhouse, the door half open, the morning sun bleeding weakly through the mist. Beside him, Anna leaned heavily on her crutches, her ankle badly twisted from the night before. Milo, the cat, perched protectively on her shoulder, his green eyes wide and alert. The town square, usually so busy by morning, was frozen in stunned silence. Shopkeepers sweeping broken glass paused mid-motion. Old Mr. Granger, the barber, leaned so far out his door he nearly fell. Mothers clutched their children's hands a little tighter, because for the first time in years, Caleb Turner wasn't walking alone. He moved slowly, the limp he usually tried to hide now bare for all to see. But his hand, weathered, calloused, was steady as he gently held Anna's elbow, guiding her across the broken sidewalk. A simple touch, an unmistakable act. It said, "She is with me. I'm not ashamed. I am still here." Whispers rose around them like smoke. "Is that Caleb Turner? Who's that girl? I thought he—" No one ever comes back from something like that. Caleb heard them. He always had. For years, the words had cut deeper than any scar on his body. But today, they slid off him like rainwater off a tin roof. Because the only voice he heard was Anna's. Soft, steady, telling him, "You're doing great." As they passed the town bakery, the smell of fresh bread hit them, warm and comforting. Caleb glanced sideways at Anna, and for the first time in forever, he smiled. Not the hollow, polite kind he used to fake. A real smile. The kind that reached his eyes and crinkled the scarred corner of his mouth. Anna smiled back, bright, unapologetic, as if she had been waiting all along for him to remember how. Great. No judgment, no pity, just faith. A rare, priceless thing. They made it to the coffee shop, the town's old gathering place, and Caleb pushed open the door. The bell chimed overhead, sharp and unfamiliar. All conversation inside stopped. Dozens of eyes turned to them, frozen mid-sip, mid-bite, mid-gossip. The silence stretched so long it felt like a second heartbeat. And then, from the back corner, a chair scraped against the worn wooden floor. Mrs. Dalrymple, the oldest, crankiest woman in town, rose shakily to her feet. For a moment, no one breathed. She walked to the counter, picked up 2 mugs of steaming black coffee, and, to everyone's shock, brought them straight to Caleb and Anna. She set them down carefully, nodded once, and said, her voice like gravel, "Good to see you again, Caleb." The dam broke. Conversation swelled around them like a flood. Not gossip, not scorn. Normal, everyday chatter. People stealing glances, but smiling. A few shy waves. A cautious, hopeful ripple through the room. Anna looked up at Caleb, her eyes glistening. He squeezed her hand under the table, his own throat too tight for words. Because in that moment, for the first time since the night that had ruined everything, Caleb Turner wasn't a tragedy, or a cautionary tale, or a ghost. He was a man, living, healing, seen, all because one girl, carrying her own invisible battles, had refused to listen to the world when it said, "He's not worth it." She didn't just change his day. She didn't just save his life. She gave it back to him, and from that moment forward, whatever storms came next, they would face them together, hand in hand, soul to soul, because sometimes all it takes to resurrect a life is someone stubborn enough to believe it's still worth saving. Caleb Turner's journey from tragedy to redemption is a powerful reminder that no one is beyond saving, and sometimes the most broken souls have the greatest capacity for healing. In a world that often gives up on those who make mistakes, Anna Reid's unwavering belief in second chances shows us that love, patience, and kindness can change lives. If you believe in the power of second chances and the strength of the human spirit, don't forget to share this heartwarming story. Let it inspire others to see beyond the surface and offer a helping hand to those who need it most. Stay connected for more uplifting stories of personal transformation, redemption, and love.